God morgen. Når vi tenker på CO2, så tenker vi vel ofte på biler og fly og sånt. Og når vi tenker på plast, så tenker vi kanskje på forsøpling i naturen. Men det er en sammenheng mellom plast og CO2. Det er en sammenheng mellom plast og klima. Nå skal vi få høre fra dr. Martin Stuchtey i et analysefirma som heter SYSTEMIQ, som går gjennom hvordan plastbruken kan utvikle seg, hvilke virkemidler vi trenger for å påvirke det, og ikke minst hva som er sammenhengen mellom plast og CO2. Og den sammenhengen er stor og viktig, og hvis vi jobber med den, så jobber vi også med å få kontroll på plastproblemet.
Good morning, and thank you for your very warm invitation. It's always good to be in Norway, even if it's at the distance and digitally. Norway is quite special to me. One of the reasons it's Norway's very international, very global outlook, something that I witnessed most recently working with Norway's high-level panel for the sustainable ocean economy. I think it's in these weeks that we are starting to recognize particularly how our local fate is in fact linked to our global fate. We feel that in global politics, we feel that in climate change, and we are starting to feel it for plastic pollution. We are only starting to learn that our fate, our destiny of clean beaches in pristine Norway, or that the destiny of our fisheries is in fact linked to a much bigger global context. And let me spend the next minutes to share a couple of thoughts how two of these global plays are in fact linked with each other: climate change and plastic pollution. And I'm going to do that on the basis of some work that we have done. That is Pew Charitable Trust and SYSTEMIQ, a company that I founded 4.5 years ago. And we published a paper recently in Science Journal and a report which is called Breaking the Plastic Wave. It was done together with a very distinguished expert panel of 17 international experts. It was fully reviewed, and we were frankly quite surprised by the attention it received around the world. There were many millions of tweets, 1,500 newspapers featured it. And so we felt that the story of how we as humanity have to deal with plastic is increasingly catching our attention. We started off by describing the impacts and the risks that plastic has on ecosystems, on communities, and on the economy as a whole. And one thing that we found is that if we continue in a business as usual way, plastic is this material that will double in production until 2040. It will triple in ocean pollution, and it will quadruple with regard to the plastic that will sit in our ocean environments. And just by hearing those numbers, it's getting absolutely clear that this is a future we collectively cannot want. We have less discussed how these two elements, plastic and climate change, come together. And if you look at it, this is equally worrying, because today municipal solid waste related to plastic is associated with about 3% of our carbon emissions. And our report found out that by 2040, 19% of the permissible emissions will actually be related to that category of fast-moving plastics. So what's the solution? When we started, we asked ourselves, is there really a trade-off between ecosystems, oceans, on the one hand, and the atmosphere, climate, on the other hand? As it turns out, there is no trade-off between pollution and climate. The solution, if properly chosen, can go, and I would even go so far to say has to go hand in hand. So a circular solution to the plastic challenge offers a solution both to pollution and to carbon emissions. And we have looked at all the relevant solutions that are available, and we modeled it as a major system together with Oxford University. The answer that was produced in that paper in the end are wedges. And we think there is an opportunity to massively reduce leakage of plastic into the environment through a number of levers. We call them wedges. The most important wedge is plastic reduction. So if we go to reuse, so you are using your carry-along coffee cup rather than using a single-use one every single time, it's refilling or it's just eliminating over-packaging. And we think that that actually can happen to about 25% of the business as usual volumes that we will have in 2040. We think then there is a second strong force, which is substitution, moving to other materials that are more friendly to the environment. And we think about 12 to 15% of the volume actually can be reduced through using alternative substitute materials. And then there is a quarter of the business as usual materials, which in fact can be recycled, either mechanical recycling or to some extent through a new technology called chemical recycling. And if you look at the climate performance of these avenues, you find out that plastic elimination is in fact something that saves per every ton of plastic that would otherwise be used 2.5 to 5 tons of CO2. If you look at substitution, it could avoid something like 0 to 2 tons of CO2 for plastic otherwise being used. Or if you look at mechanical recycling, it could save us something like 1 to 2.5 tons of CO2 emissions for every ton of plastic otherwise used. And we, of course, looked at that very carefully with LCA, life cycle analysis, as we did that work. There's one caveat to that. As always in life, this only works if through the use of less material, better materials, alternative materials, we are not creating food waste, which then, of course, again, turns into a carbon load. So that must not happen. So in aggregate these solutions, if they are scaled globally, we think that this brings us into a position where it's not about cleaning versus boiling the ocean. We come towards a solution where the plastic system has 25% less emissions than business as usual way. And this is by dematerialization only. We are not talking yet about the greening of the process of producing plastic, for example, by bringing in more green power. We like this scenario a lot. We called it a system change scenario because it's not just adding up a couple of interesting levers of things we could do, singular actions by singular players. It's a systemic solution where we are redefining the system altogether. And it brings us good results. I talked about 25% at least improved climate performance. It also brings us 80% less pollution into the global ocean. That's really very much what we have been solving and optimizing for in the Breaking the Plastic Wave work. But it also, and that's very important to note, it will cost the public sector 11% less to clean up simply because there's less volume running through and there's more recyclable material coming to the end of life. That's about 70 billion over the next 20 years. So that's a substantial improvement for all those who have to run recovery systems. And it's creating 700,000 new jobs, which is important. So overall, we think that this is a way to marry our climate and our ecosystem story. We think also that it tells a much broader story. It tells a story of how the circular economy is superior and more attractive. And it tells a story how that is a solution that offers itself, particularly at a moment where we have to rebuild our economies after the pandemic, and that is both globally and locally. With that, I leave you and I wish you very instructive, very insightful proceedings. Thanks a lot for your kind invitation again.
Altså, med dagens utvikling vil verdens plastproduksjon i 2040 være doblet. Forsøplingen til havet vil være tredoblet, og mengden plastsøppel i havet vil være 4 ganger så stor som de enorme mengdene som allerede er der i dag. Altså en helt uholdbar utvikling. Men så har vi også fått høre at det går an å gjøre noe med dette. En rekke tiltak som vi som forbrukere, næringslivet og myndighetene kan gjennomføre. Vi som forbrukere kan se etter alternativer til plast. Vi kan rett og slett bruke mindre plast. Vi kan velge nedbrytbare materialer som ikke er plast. Vi kan gjenbruke, og vi kan kjøpe brukt. Næringslivet kan lete etter alternativer til plast, produsere bærekraftige alternativer til plast, og myndighetene må selvfølgelig sette inn de tiltakene som legger til rette for at vi kan gjøre dette. Og så kommer det en viktig opplysning til. For hvert tonn plast vi ikke bruker, så kutter vi et eller annet sted mellom 2,5 og 5 tonn CO2-utslipp. Og ganger du det med all plasten som forekommer i verden, så ser vi at å redusere plastforbruket, øke plastresirkuleringen, så gjør vi en stor klimainnsats i tillegg til innsatsen for natur og miljø. Det er en god motivasjon.